Does that mean people are very okay with their leader, regardless of how many years he'll be in power?
Well, I think from where I sit is that we usually say that elections are contextual.
Yeah.
Rwanda came from a post-conflict situation, is a post-conflict society. If it feels that it does not need to move at the moment, and therefore they feel much more in a stable environment with Paul Kagame, then so be it. So long as the electorate, I think what we are supposed to be worried is whether the vote was conducted in a free and fair and credible environment, because that is what we would use to gauge. If the people love the president and they want to vote the president every next time, that's okay. And if they're following the laws of the country, then those are okay. But we must interrogate some of those issues further because, some of the laws which have been put in some countries are unfair, even in the aspect of if measured against the framework of natural calls for justice. So, you don't want a situation where a president wants to become president forever, for instance. Yes. Whether that is in the constitution or not, I think it's unfair for those people to be subjected to a framework where somebody can be able to rule forever. So I think some of the issues will require legal reforms, but where we have people feeling that they are very comfortable with a certain leader, especially because stability is a key concern for them, then that's a context that must be appreciated, even as you analyze the electoral process.
So it's okay as long as it's the will of the people.
The most important thing in an election is that the will of the people is seen to have been served. Yes. And that is the most important. So if that is protected with the laws, with the procedures, with the conduct of the elections, and with the outcomes of those electoral processes, then that's okay.
Thank you so much for that insight. Our viewers and listeners can really understand at least the global and our African perspective. And now coming back home, 2024 has not been an election year, but 2024 has been quite an eventful year, stemming from all the processes, electoral processes, and the political landscape that keeps on changing every other day. According to you, Mule Musau, just looking at the year that we've had as a country, how do you describe it? How do you see it, especially just the year as just the general landscape without going into the specifics, which we'll actually get into?
Well, it's been a very eventful year. It is the year in which, for the first time, something called Gen Z happened. Some animal called Gen Z happened, and not only shook the foundations of the Kenyan political structure and edifice, but also the entire African continent, because the shake or what we call the reverberations, they were felt across the continent. In Nigeria, in Tanzania, in Uganda, in Senegal. I think everybody was talking about in Ghana, where I went just after those Gen Z activities. There was a lot of excitement over what had happened in Kenya. So it's been a very eventful year. It's been a year that saw us start having the first package of electoral reforms being processed. That was a NADCO reports which were presented to Parliament, and then thereafter we had, up to now there are still discussions in the August houses in terms of how to process those particular reforms. It's another year where we've seen the usual handshake in Kenya politics, where the opposition and the government come together and enjoy the proceeds of power together, despite the fact that people voted them separately, decided one against the other. But now we see the opposition leader and the president working very closely together. The two main political parties, actually, mending fences and working in the same government. even as they still say we are in the opposition and the other one is on government. It's a year that we have dared to impeach, or Kenyans have dared to impeach the deputy president in a process which is currently ongoing. So yes, it's been a very eventful year. It's full of very many things, but that's a Kenyan plate for you. That's a Kenyan democracy plate. Anytime. I mean, Kenya is always as eventful as any other that we will find out there in the world.
And I think we'll be forgiven for saying, as much as the globe and the continent have been having election, the Kenyan situation has been more of an election. The how famous Kenya has become has just been on the same level as countries that have had controversial elections throughout the year, because even though in 2024 Kenya has not had an election, it has been in every conversation, in many of the conversation, together with countries that have had elections. But leaving the global or the continental perspective of Kenya aside, Kenyans themselves, us ourselves, we do understand there are issues that we are facing. As much as I'd like to say we are very dramatic. We are a dramatic country, and we are always on the table in conversations, but we have our own internal issues, very serious internal issues, considering that we are only 2 years away. Now that we are nearing the end of this year, that will be say we are only 2 years away from the next general elections. But before we get to these general elections, this has been a period where electoral reforms were supposed to be enforced, amended, implemented. But as much as we are seeing effort towards implementing these electoral reforms, we are also seeing a negative side of it, where we currently do not have an electoral commission, which has also hindered some of the important processes, electoral processes that are supposed to be ongoing. Having worked in this electoral space for quite a long time, how do you read the situation whereby we do not have an electoral commission, but then we have stalled processes, and we are still very alive to the fact that we are nearing the next general elections? What are the implications for Kenya as a country?
Well, just first correction that Kenya is, we're not full of drama. We are.
That's just my personal opinion. I should stress that.
This is a country which is which is very active politically. Let me let's sanitize the language. It is a politically active country, and we have a phenomena that we call a permanent campaign mode.
Yes,
that Kenya is always on a permanent campaign mode. After one election is over, we start the agitation for the next election. And whatever alignments and realignments politically and otherwise, they begin immediately after the last election is conducted. So since it looks like it's something that we have perfected over the years, then that is in our DNA. And therefore, Kenya will continue doing this thing. In fact, I think the only thing which has been added, the spice which has been added right now, is that we have now a younger generation which is now joining the fray. And therefore, it's going to be much more interesting with the Gen Zs now also part of that process, which we're calling the permanent campaign mode. So that's where we are. And in one way, it's a good thing. In another way, it's a bad thing. It's a good thing in terms of it allows Kenyans to be very alive to the issues which are being canvassed across the country. It allows us to be able to be interrogative of the systems, the processes, and the decisions which are being made by our leaders. In the bad way is that it stops. It delays the implementation of very many progressive ideas, because everybody is asking and questioning issues. It stops because of the high voltage political activities. It delays, it frustrates some initiatives which are being done by even the government itself in terms of development programs. So that's the downside of it. But that's Kenya. As I say, that's exactly what Kenya is. The issue about IBC and the electoral processes and implications of not having the election commission in place is an outcome of is part of the outcomes of that very excited engagement environment that Kenya finds itself. We remember that the commissioners who are there, their terms of office came to an end more than a year ago.
True.
The other who are remaining, they resigned. Another was considered unfit to continue being in office. And therefore, the entire team of commissioners, one way or the other, left office more than a year ago, more than one, and I think nearing 2 years now. And for that while, there have been many processes which have been overtaken by events. Number one is just the normal administrative issues of the commission, which are supposed to be carried out. Remember, we have two processes which are supposed to be continuous throughout, which is one is voter education and the other is voter registration. These have been hampered by the lack of leadership of the commission. We have had by-elections which keep increasing over time. We have constituencies, we do not have members of parliament, so we have constituents who are not represented as we speak. We have ward assemblies where we don't have representation in certain wards because for one reason or the other, we don't have members of those ward assemblies. And that's a great injustice to those particular communities and those particular constituents because they have a right to representation. And there have been a number of cases which have been taken to court just to contest this because it's a human rights issue. You cannot be making decisions in parliament and you have constituencies where we don't have representation. So basically it means that the members on those particular constituencies, the Lagderas, the Banisas, they're not part of the decision making. So when you're considering such very important bills as the finance bill, even the impeachment of the deputy president, which is currently ongoing, it means those constituents did not participate in that process. So that's a great injustice as far as decision making is concerned. The boundary delimitation activity, which had a timeline, an upper timeline of expiring in March of this year, has not been attended to. And that's a crucial aspect. Remember, the boundaries are done because population increases. We need fair representation. We use a quota to allocate number of people who are going to be represented by a member of parliament. So if, for instance, Nairobi has been overpopulating over the last 8 years or so, and the last time we did this, actually not 12 years ago is when we did the last boundary review. So in those 12 years, if the population of Nairobi has more than doubled, it means that the people who are being represented by one member of parliament in some of the 17 constituencies in Nairobi has doubled or thereabouts. And therefore, it's unfair that those people are having the only one member of parliament representing them as another one, who is in Lamu, where there's only maybe 100,000 people.
Yes.
So you cannot put them in the same basket. And that's an issue that has been canvassed. And remember the politicians, for instance, very recently they were talking about the 1 man, 1 shilling, 1 vote campaign. That is an issue above boundaries. When you say 1 man, 1 vote, 1 shilling, that means allocation of money. That means the decision making by parliament is supposed to be equitable. So where it is not equitable because the boundaries are not being reviewed, again, that becomes an injustice to the people of Kenya, and that violates the very principles of our constitution that ensure that there is fair representation of the people and delegation of power to members who are supposed to articulate the wishes of the people in different assemblies. So that's a big issue. But the third aspect, the third implication, which is also a huge issue, is that the delay in appointment of the election commission affects also the processing of electoral reforms.
Yes.
After every election, we pick up a number of issues that need to be reviewed to improve the system. We have suffered before the issue of very late reforms coming in sometimes in the 11th hour. because you've not had, our laws do not prohibit even laws being changed on the last evening before an election. And knowing that we have very uncanny politicians who can be able to, who are full of mischief, anything can be, processed in the last hour and becomes effective. So among the laws that are supposed to be effected is a law which puts a cap on the timelines when you can be able to do these reforms. According to the proposed proposals, some of them which were in that NADCO report, is that 18 months to an elections, you should not condone any legal reforms that affect that election. So basically what that would say, if that was become law, it would mean that we only have between now and February of 2026 to enact any meaningful reforms. Any far-reaching reforms. The legal reforms are the ones which are usually far-reaching. So if we don't, if you only have a window of about a year, and we still don't have a commission, and based on the timelines that we are looking at, we are seeing a commission which is going to be in place for March next year, between March and June next year. Then there's a lot of delay. And by that time, we now will be coming to the exact 2 years to an election, where you have to conduct by-elections, where you have to conduct boundary review, if you need to do, where you have to do reforms for that election within 6 months, and then start preparing for an election. And you need a full year to be able to participate and engage in, for preparations to engage in an election process. So that's already a very big problem by itself.